The harsh winds of the Montana Territory in March 1893 carried with them the promise of spring. But they also brought the body of an unknown woman to the doorstep of rancher Eli Morrison's remote homestead in the Bitterroot Valley, where she collapsed and died before he could provide any assistance or learn anything about her identity or the circumstances that had brought her to his isolated ranch. Eli operated the Lone Pine Ranch on 4,000 acres of mountain valley land, about 40 miles southwest of Missouri, where he raised cattle and horses in solitude. That had been his choice ever since returning from the Civil War, 28 years earlier, with wounds both physical and psychological that had made normal social interaction difficult for him to manage. The ranch was positioned in a valley that provided natural shelter from the severe weather that characterized Montana winters, with access to mountain streams and grazing lands that could support livestock even during the harshest seasons. Eli had chosen the location partly for its beauty and partly for its isolation, which allowed him to avoid the complications of community life while building a modest but sustainable operation that met his simple needs. At 53, Eli had lived alone for most of his adult life, content with the company of his animals and the rhythms of seasonal ranch work that provided structure and purpose without requiring him to navigate the social relationships that he found challenging and often painful. His only regular human contact came from quarterly trips to Missoula for supplies and his annual business dealings with cattle buyers who purchased his small but high-quality herds. The woman's arrival on that cold March morning shattered Eli's carefully maintained isolation in ways that he could not have anticipated. She appeared to be in her late 40s or early 50s, well-dressed despite obvious signs of hard travel, and carrying a small leather satchel that suggested she had been on some kind of deliberate journey, rather than simply wandering aimlessly through the wilderness. Eli found her collapsed on his front porch when he emerged to begin his morning chores, obviously exhausted and suffering from exposure to the elements. Despite his efforts to revive her with warmth and water, the woman died within minutes of his discovery, leaving him with the body of a complete stranger and no information about her identity or the reasons for her presence at his remote ranch. "Ma'am," Eli said to the lifeless woman as he knelt beside her on his porch, "I wish I could have helped you. I don't know who you are or what brought you here, but I'll see that you get a proper burial." The decision to bury the woman on his property, rather than transporting her body to town, reflected both Eli's practical understanding of the difficulties involved in moving a corpse across 40 miles of rough terrain and his instinctive respect for someone who had obviously been on an important mission when death overtook her. Eli spent the day preparing a gravesite on a hill overlooking his ranch buildings, choosing a location that provided a view of the valley and mountains that he found beautiful and peaceful. The work of digging the grave in the partially frozen ground was difficult, but it gave Eli time to think about the woman and wonder about the circumstances that had brought her to die alone at his isolated ranch. As he prepared the body for burial, Eli searched the woman's clothing for any identification or clues about her identity, hoping to find information that would allow him to notify her family or friends about her death. The search revealed a few personal items, a small amount of money, a locket containing the photograph of a young boy, and a leather-bound diary that appeared to contain personal writings spanning several years. But it was the discovery of a sealed letter in the woman's coat pocket that would transform Eli's understanding of her presence at his ranch and challenge everything he thought he knew about his own past and the connections between people that transcend normal explanations. The letter was addressed simply to Sparrow, in handwriting that Eli recognized immediately, despite not having seen it for over 30 years. The nickname had been used by only one person in Eli's entire life, his younger sister Sarah, who had called him Sparrow because of his habit of climbing trees and perching in high places to observe the world around him. Sarah Morrison had died of typhoid fever in 1862 when Eli was 22 and she was 18, and her death had been one of the tragedies that had motivated his decision to leave their home in Ohio and seek a new life in the West after the Civil War. Eli had not heard his childhood nickname spoken aloud in over 3 decades, and seeing it written on a letter carried by a stranger who had died at his ranch created a mystery that defied rational explanation. With trembling hands, Eli opened the letter and began reading words that seemed to come from beyond death itself, written in Sarah's unmistakable handwriting, and addressing him with the familiarity and affection that had characterized their relationship during their childhood together in Ohio. "My dearest Sparrow," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then Mrs. Catherine Williams has found you as I hoped she would, and you are learning about connections that death cannot break and love that continues even when people are separated by circumstances beyond their control. Eli felt the world shift around him as he read his sister's words, trying to understand how a letter written in Sarah's handwriting could have been carried by a stranger who had somehow known to seek him out at his remote Montana ranch. The impossibility of the situation challenged everything Eli thought he understood about life, death, and the nature of love itself. The letter continued with details about Eli's current life that Sarah could not possibly have known, describing his ranch, his animals, and even his daily routines with an accuracy that suggested ongoing observation rather than distant memory. "I know that you have been alone for many years," Sarah's letter continued, "and that you chose isolation because you believed that loving people only leads to losing them. But Sparrow, love doesn't end when people die, it just finds new ways to connect the people who need each other most." As Eli read further, he learned that Catherine Williams, the woman who had died on his porch, had been carrying not just his letter, but also a mission that connected him to people and circumstances that would challenge his understanding of coincidence, fate, and the invisible threads that bind human lives together across time and distance. The letter explained that Catherine had been searching for Eli specifically, guided by information that had come to her through channels that defied normal explanation, and that her death at his ranch was not the end of her mission, but the beginning of revelations that would transform his understanding of his place in a world that was far more connected than he had ever imagined. The messenger's mission, the diary that Eli Morrison found among Catherine Williams' possessions, revealed the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her across the continent to die at his ranch, and her writings painted a picture of a woman whose life had been shaped by experiences that challenged conventional understanding of how the living and the dead could communicate across the boundary that separates life from whatever comes after. Catherine Williams had been a schoolteacher in Portland, Oregon, whose apparently normal life had been transformed 3 years earlier, when she began experiencing what she described as visitations from deceased individuals who sought her help in delivering messages to living relatives and friends. Her diary entries documented dozens of encounters with spirits who provided her with specific information about people they had loved, along with detailed instructions about how to locate these individuals and deliver messages that were designed to heal grief, resolve conflicts, or provide comfort during difficult times. March 10, 1890. Catherine had written in one of her earliest diary entries about these experiences, "I am visited again by the young woman with dark hair who speaks of her brother in Montana. She calls him Sparrow and says he has been alone too long, carrying guilt about her death that was never his responsibility to bear. She shows me images of mountains and a valley with a single pine tree, and she begs me to find him and tell him that love continues even when bodies fail." Eli felt a chill as he read Catherine's description of Sarah, recognizing details about his sister's appearance and personality that no stranger could have known. But more unsettling was Catherine's accurate description of his ranch, including the distinctive lone pine tree that had given the property its name, and which was visible from miles away across the valley. As Eli continued reading Catherine's diary, he learned that her journey to find him had been part of a 3-year mission that had taken her throughout the Western Territories, delivering messages from deceased individuals to their living loved ones. Her accounts described successful reunions, healed relationships, and family reconciliations that had been facilitated by information that could only have come from sources beyond normal human experience. June 15, 1892. Catherine had written, "I have delivered Sarah Morrison's message to her aunt in Colorado, as she requested. The elderly woman wept when I told her that Sarah wanted her to know that the family Bible she had given her was treasured and that Sarah had read from it every night until her death. The aunt said she had wondered for 30 years whether the gift had been meaningful to Sarah, and learning that it had brought her great." Eli remembered his Aunt Margaret and the Bible she had given Sarah for his 16th birthday, a gift that Sarah had indeed treasured and read from daily until typhoid fever had claimed her life. The accuracy of Catherine's information about private family matters convinced Eli that her experiences, however impossible they might seem, was somehow genuine. But it was Catherine's account of her final instructions from Sarah that explained why she had made the dangerous journey to his remote ranch despite her own declining health and the risks involved in traveling alone through the Montana wilderness during winter. February 20, 1893. Catherine had written in one of her final diary entries, "Sarah Morrison comes to me with urgent intensity, saying that her brother is in great danger, physical danger, but spiritual danger from the isolation and guilt he has carried for 30 years. She says he blames himself for her death because he was away fighting in the war when she became ill. And this guilt has prevented him from forming the human connections that would give his life meaning and purpose. Eli felt tears forming in his eyes as he read Catherine's words, recognizing the accuracy of her description of the guilt he had carried. Since learning of Sarah's death while he was serving with the Union Army in Virginia, he had indeed blamed himself for being absent when Sarah needed him. And this guilt had motivated many of his decisions about isolation and avoidance of emotional attachments that might lead to future losses. Catherine's diary revealed that Sarah had provided her with specific instructions about finding Eli and delivering a message that was designed to free him from the guilt that had shaped his life for 3 decades. But the message was not simply about forgiveness, it was about purpose, connection, and the responsibility that the living have to honor the dead by embracing life rather than withdrawing from it. Sarah tells me that her brother has a mission that he has not yet discovered, Catherine had written, and that his isolation has prevented him from recognizing the ways that his knowledge, resources, and compassion could help people who need exactly what he has to offer. She says that her death was not his failure, but rather a reminder that life is precious and should be lived fully in service to others. The specific instructions that Sarah had given Catherine included detailed descriptions of people in the area around Eli's ranch who were facing difficulties that his help could address, along with guidance about how he could emerge from his isolation to serve his community without sacrificing the solitude that he needed for his own well-being. Among these instructions was information about the Henderson family, whose farm was located about 20 miles from Eli's ranch, and who were struggling with crop failures that threatened to force them to abandon their homestead. Sarah had told Catherine that Eli possessed both the agricultural knowledge and the financial resources necessary to help the Hendersons succeed, while also providing him with the human connection that would begin to heal his self-imposed isolation. Catherine's diary also included information about Mary Patterson, a widow with 3 young children who was trying to operate a small ranch near Hamilton, and who needed exactly the kind of practical assistance and emotional support that Eli was capable of providing. Sarah had apparently provided Catherine with detailed information about Mary's circumstances and specific suggestions about how Eli could help her without overstepping appropriate boundaries. But perhaps most significantly, Catherine's final diary entries revealed that Sarah had told her about a larger network of people throughout the Montana Territory who were struggling with problems that could be addressed by individuals with Eli's combination of resources, experience, and compassion. Sarah's vision was not just about helping her brother overcome his guilt and isolation, but about connecting him to a community of people who needed each other and could create something stronger together than any of them could achieve alone. As Eli finished reading Catherine's diary, he understood that the woman who had died on his porch had been far more than a simple messenger. She had been an agent of transformation whose mission was to connect him with a purpose that would honor Sarah's memory while serving the broader community of people who were building lives in the challenging environment of the Montana frontier. The decision that Eli faced was whether to remain in the isolation that had protected him from further loss and disappointment, or to embrace the mission that Sarah had apparently designed specifically for him, knowing that it would require him to risk the emotional attachments that he had been avoiding for 30 years. Awakening to Morrison's decision to honor Catherine Williams' mission by reaching out to the people Sarah had identified required him to overcome 3 decades of carefully maintained isolation and venture into social relationships that had the potential to heal his grief while also creating new vulnerabilities to loss and disappointment. The first test of his resolve came when he rode to the Henderson farm to offer assistance with their crop failures, carrying with him both practical, agricultural knowledge and the financial resources necessary to help them recover from the setbacks that threatened to destroy their homestead. The 20-mile journey was the longest distance Eli had traveled from his ranch for any purpose other than essential business in over 5 years. William Henderson and his wife Martha had been struggling for 3 years to establish their farm on land that required drainage improvements and soil amendments that they lacked the knowledge and resources to implement effectively. Their previous crop failures had left them facing bankruptcy and the prospect of returning east with nothing to show for their frontier dreams except debt and disappointment. "Mr. Henderson," Eli said as he approached the farmhouse where William was examining failed wheat plantings. "I'm Eli Morrison from the Lone Pine Ranch. I heard you've been having some difficulties with your crops, and I wondered if I might be able to offer some assistance." William's reaction to Eli's unexpected offer revealed both the desperation of their situation and the suspicion that characterized frontier people's response to unsolicited help from strangers. "Mr. Morrison," William replied cautiously, "I appreciate the offer, but we don't have money to pay for consultation or assistance. We're pretty much at the end of our resources." "I'm not looking for payment," Eli explained. "I've had some success with farming in difficult conditions, and I thought my experience might be useful to you. Sometimes a fresh perspective can identify solutions that aren't obvious to people who are too close to the problem." The conversation that followed revealed both the specific technical problems that had caused the Henderson family's crop failures and the broader isolation and discouragement that had prevented them from seeking help from neighbors who might have provided assistance. Their situation illustrated exactly the kind of community disconnection that Sarah had apparently wanted. To address Eli's examination of the Henderson farm revealed drainage problems that could be solved with relatively simple engineering solutions, along with soil chemistry issues that could be addressed through amendments that Eli knew how to prepare and apply. But more importantly, he recognized that the Hendersons' problems were not just technical, but also social. They had been trying to succeed without the community connections that made frontier farming viable for most families. "William," Eli said after completing his assessment of the farm, "your land has good potential, but it needs some work before it will produce reliably. I'd like to help you implement the improvements that are needed, and I'd also like to introduce you to other farmers in the area who have faced similar challenges." The improvements that Eli helped William implement included drainage ditches, soil amendments, and crop rotation strategies that transformed the farm's productivity within a single growing season. But equally important was the network of relationships that Eli facilitated between the Hendersons and other farming families who could provide ongoing support and cooperation that made individual success more achievable for everyone involved. The success of his work with the Henderson family gave Eli the confidence to approach Mary Patterson, the widow whose circumstances Sarah had described to Catherine Williams with remarkable accuracy. Mary was indeed struggling to operate a small ranch while raising 3 children alone, facing challenges that required exactly the kind of practical assistance and emotional support that Eli was capable of providing. Mary Patterson had been widowed 2 years earlier when her husband died in a riding accident, leaving her with responsibility for maintaining their ranch operation while caring for children aged 6, 9, and 12. Her situation was complicated by her lack of experience with many aspects of ranch management and by the social isolation that widowed women often experienced in frontier communities. "Mrs. Patterson," Eli said when he visited her ranch to offer assistance, "I understand you've been managing this operation alone since your husband's death. I wondered if there might be ways that I could help with some of the more challenging aspects of ranch work." Mary's response revealed both her need for assistance and her concern about accepting help from a man whose motivations she couldn't fully understand. "Mr. Morrison," Mary replied, "I appreciate the offer, but I need to ask why you're interested in helping me. I've been managing alone for 2 years, and most people seem to think that a woman can't run a ranch successfully." Eli's answer required him to share more about his personal circumstances and motivations than he had revealed to anyone in decades, opening himself to the kind of emotional vulnerability that he had been avoiding since Sarah's death. "Mrs. Patterson," Eli said, "I lost my sister 30 years ago, and I've been living alone ever since, because I was afraid of caring about people and losing them. But I've recently learned that isolation isn't protection, it's just another kind of loss. I'd like to help you, because helping others is one way of honoring the people we've lost." The assistance that Eli provided to Mary Patterson included practical ranch management support, help with seasonal activities that required more workers than she could provide alone, and introduction to community resources that could help her children access education and social opportunities. But perhaps most importantly, his friendship provided her with the emotional support that made the challenges of widowhood more manageable. The relationship that developed between Eli and Mary grew gradually from practical cooperation to personal friendship, and eventually to love that honored both their past losses and their current needs for companionship and partnership. Their courtship was careful and respectful, guided by shared understanding of grief and the courage required to risk caring about someone again after experiencing devastating loss. "Eli," Mary said during one of their conversations about the possibility of marriage, "I want you to know that I understand the risk we're both taking. Loving someone means accepting the possibility of losing them, but it also means choosing to live fully despite that risk." "Mary," Eli replied, My sister spent 3 years trying to teach me that love doesn't end. When people die, it just finds new ways to connect people who need each other. I think she would be happy to know that her love helped me find you." The marriage that took place 6 months later created not just a partnership between two people who had found love after loss, but also a family that included Mary's 3 children and a ranch operation that became a center of community, activity, and mutual support for families throughout the valley. The circle completed the transformation of Eli Morrison from an isolated rancher to the center of a thriving community network, reached its culmination when he and Mary established their ranch as an informal headquarters for mutual aid and cooperation among the scattered families of the Bitterroot Valley, creating exactly the kind of connected community that Sarah had apparently envisioned when she sent Catherine Williams on her final mission. The success of Eli's interventions with the Henderson family and his marriage to Mary Patterson had demonstrated both his capacity for leadership and his ability to identify and address the underlying problems that prevented frontier families from achieving sustainable prosperity. Word of his effectiveness spread throughout the valley, drawing requests for assistance from families facing various challenges that required the combination of practical knowledge, financial resources, and community organization that Eli had learned to provide. The ranch house that Eli and Mary shared became a regular meeting place for neighboring families who gathered to share information, coordinate seasonal activities, and provide mutual support during crises. These gatherings served both practical and social functions, helping isolated families maintain the human connections that made frontier life bearable, while creating networks of cooperation that increased everyone's chances of long-term success. "Eli," said James Crawford during one of these community meetings, "what you've accomplished here goes beyond helping individual families. You've created something that makes all of us stronger and more secure than we could be on our own." The community network that emerged around Eli and Mary's ranch included formal arrangements for sharing labor during harvest seasons, cooperative purchasing agreements that reduced costs for supplies and equipment, and mutual aid systems that provided assistance during emergencies or family crises. But perhaps most importantly, it created social relationships that gave people reasons to stay in the valley rather than abandoning their homesteads when challenges became overwhelming. Mary's 3 children thrived in this environment, benefiting not only from the stability that Eli's presence provided, but also from the extended family of community relationships that gave them access to diverse role models and educational opportunities. Their success illustrated how community connections could provide children with advantages that individual families could not offer alone. Eli, 12-year-old Thomas Patterson, said during one of their conversations about his future plans, "I want to learn everything you know about ranching and farming so I can help other families the way you've helped us." The educational aspect of the community network became increasingly important as more families with children settled in the valley and needed access to schooling that would prepare their children for successful adult lives. Eli and Mary worked with other parents to establish a school that served children from throughout the valley, hiring teachers and developing curricula that reflected both academic subjects and practical skills needed for frontier life. But the most profound validation of the mission that Sarah had designed came when Eli received a visit from Margaret Morrison, the elderly aunt who had given Sarah the Bible that Catherine Williams had mentioned in her diary. Margaret had traveled from Colorado specifically to meet the nephew she had not seen since Sarah's funeral 30 years earlier. "Elijah," Aunt Margaret said as she embraced him at the ranch, "I've come to see what my Sarah has accomplished through you. Catherine Williams visited me 2 years ago and told me about Sarah's plans for your future, and I wanted to witness the results for myself." Margaret's visit revealed that Catherine Williams had been part of a larger network of people who had been receiving messages from deceased loved ones, and that Sarah's mission for Eli was connected to similar efforts throughout the Western Territories to create communities based on cooperation, mutual aid, and shared responsibility for collective well-being. Sarah always believed that love was meant to be shared, Margaret told Eli as they visited Sarah's grave, which he had established on the hill overlooking his ranch. "She wouldn't have wanted you to honor her memory through isolation and grief. She would have wanted you to honor her memory by living fully and helping others do the same." The annual memorial service that Eli and Mary established to honor both Sarah Morrison and Catherine Williams became a community tradition that celebrated not just the memory of the deceased, but also the ongoing connections between past and present, individual and community, love and service that defined the values of their valley community. During the 5th anniversary of Catherine's death, As community members gathered at Sarah's grave to remember both women and celebrate the community they had helped create, Eli reflected on the journey that had transformed his understanding of loss, love, and purpose. 5 years ago, Eli said to the assembled community, "A stranger died on my porch carrying a letter from my sister, who had been dead for 30 years. That letter taught me that love doesn't end when people die, just finds new ways to help the living connect with each other and build something beautiful together." Mary added her own reflection on the transformation they had witnessed. Sarah Morrison and Catherine Williams showed us that the deepest way to honor the people we've lost is to embrace the people who are still here and help them flourish. Every family that succeeds in this valley, every child that grows up strong and confident, every act of mutual aid and cooperation, all of it honors their memory. The community that Eli and Mary built in the Bitterroot Valley became a model for other settlements throughout Montana, demonstrating that frontier success depended not just on individual courage and hard work, but also on the social connections and mutual support systems that enabled families to survive challenges that would overwhelm isolated individuals. 20 years after Catherine Williams' death, Eli stood in the same spot where he had found her body, now surrounded by the thriving community that her mission had made possible. The memorial garden that marked both her grave and Sarah's had become a place where community members gathered to remember their own losses while celebrating the continuing power of love to create connections between people who needed each other. "Catherine," Eli said quietly as he placed flowers on her grave, "you carried Sarah's love across a continent to find me when I had forgotten how to love others. The community we've built here is proof that your mission succeeded beyond anything you could have imagined." The letter that had started everything, Sarah's message to her brother, Sparrow, was now displayed in the community school as a reminder to children about the power of love to transcend death and create lasting change in the world. The nickname that only Sarah had used for Eli had become a symbol of the family connections that could extend beyond individual households to encompass entire communities committed to mutual care and support. As Eli watched children playing in the schoolyard that had been built on land donated by grateful families, he understood that Sarah's love had indeed found new ways to help people after her death. Through Catherine Williams' sacrifice and his own willingness to emerge from isolation, that love had created something that would benefit generations of families who would call the Bitterroot Valley home. The circle that had begun with a sister's childhood nickname for her brother had expanded to encompass an entire community united by the understanding that love, when shared generously, multiplies rather than diminishes, creating abundance that enriches everyone it touches. If this incredible story about love transcending death and creating lasting community moved your heart, smash that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories about connections that defy explanation and purpose that emerges from our deepest losses. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that isolation isn't protection, it's just another kind of loss, and that our greatest healing often comes through serving others. Comment below and tell us about a time when helping someone else helped heal your own heart. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest inspiring stories. Remember, love doesn't end when people die, it just finds new ways to connect people who need each other most.